Everybody, welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat. Lorin, we got a good one in, and I think this is one that comes in probably quite often for you and I, especially for those newer pet parents who have gotten a young being into their, family. And that is, when should they be looking at spay and neutering, especially in that pediatric range? And I know you and I both have some pretty strong feelings on that one. So I'll defer to you to kick things off.
Yeah. So my issue with anything in the pet industry is the absolutes. Something has to be done absolutely this way or else.
Right.
And I don't think anything is absolute. I don't think anything in life is absolute. Nothing that I can think of right now that I could say other than be kind to animals or else. Um,
That is an absolute.
but you know what I mean. When it comes to the care of the animal, it's the animal that's in front of you that has to be considered, and your situation and your finances and everything that's relative. So so when it comes to spay and neuter, there's a lot right now that has been coming to the forefront in regards to this. And it's just not as cut and dried as how it's being relayed. I wish it was, but nothing living has anything cut and dried about it. Um, so the bigger issue overall is pediatric spay and neuter. And this is when you acquire a spay, an unspayed, unneutered, not fixed, whatever your vernacular is, animal, and people run off to get that animal spayed or neutered at 4 months, 6 months, things like that, because they don't want to deal with, what happens when the animal isn't spayed or neutered. And what they fail to understand is the medical ramifications of that. And there's a multitude depending on the individual animal and depending on the size of the animal. It has definitely been shown that pediatric spay and neuter is fraught with issues. The growth plates don't close, the hormones are taken away, the animal doesn't develop properly. Imagine being forced into, if it's a female dog, into, for lack of a better example, menopause, or a human child being forced into menopause at 10 years of age or something like that. It just, you need those hormones. Those are normal for a being to have, to properly develop and mature and for the body to grow at the rate it's supposed to. So I could always tell when, especially a larger breed animal came into my store, because they were typically being walked in. And if they were spayed or neutered too early, I could see it as the animal crossed the threshold. There's a higher propensity of hip dysplasia in larger breed animals that are spayed or neutered too early. Again, the growth plate issues. And I'm not a veterinarian, so I'm not going to get into all of the particulars, but one of the things, I have smaller breed dogs and I want what's best for them. And one of the things that I looked into was ovary sparing space, which is, OSS. And first of all, it's very hard to find veterinarians who are well versed in that. That is still a developing modality. But when you can find one, and I did find one, I found one that was pretty renowned, a couple hours from me, and I'd drive the country if I had to for my animals. So it doesn't matter how far away they are. Um, but I talked to him. He actually called me, and talked to me on the phone, and we talked about pediatric spay and neuter and the ramifications of that. And we talked about the reason he has gone over to more and more OSS type of surgeries. It's an individual thing. It costs more to do the OSS. For female dogs, it doesn't eliminate their heat cycle. So that's off-putting for some humans. And again, it depends on people's individual situations. Animals can still tie, together. If the female's going through a heat cycle and there's a male in the vicinity, nothing's going to come of that, but they can still tie. Um, But the bigger thing also comes to, do you spay or neuter at all? And there's a big push in this country because we have so many irresponsible owners, as has been proven by the number of litters that we're finding in shelters and Craigslist and all kinds of other places where they're unwanted and not planned for. In Europe, they almost never spay or neuter, which is pretty interesting. And they don't seem to have that overwhelming problem. But if you rescue an animal, you undoubtedly will get a spayed or neutered animal. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's pediatric in nature. Know that. Be willing to deal with that, accept that it is what it is. There's no way that's going to change. Doesn't matter how many conversations we have with rescue situations. And in the big picture, you can see why. They can't control the intake results of that. Too many shelters and rescues are overwhelmed. Too many foster situations, lack of foster situations exist. And it's very difficult to control. So you take the path of least resistance, which is to spay or neuter that animal as soon as you possibly can. And those typically are pediatric. And so know that when you save that animal, that you're going to probably deal with that, some result of that down the road. And you can research what those ramifications are easily. But at the same time, if you are in control and you have a young animal, please do your research. That's my premise of this. And I'll use my dogs for an example. I have two female dogs. One is 3.5. The other is probably almost 2 or so. I think in May she'll be 2.5. And they're not spayed. They are never out of our sight. They are never in a situation where they would be at risk for impregnation, accidentally or otherwise. We have total control over them, and we are helicopter parents. So we've got this. But at some point, I will spay them. And I had this conversation with my groomer recently because she has a kid that I think is 6 or 7, and she just got that kid spayed. And when I asked her why, she said she wanted to avoid pyometria. And that's an issue, and I talked to that OSS vet about that. He said, if it's only an issue if a stump is left, and that sort of thing. But do I want to risk that? In that spay neuter, do I want to risk that potential? So there's a lot of factors that have to be weighed out. She got her kid spayed and made sure that she picked a vet who took all of that into consideration. She did not choose OSS. I feel less strongly about that because the kid's mature. This is a 30-pound, I think, or 20-pound. Think about what it is. I think it's a Frenchie. So I think it's a 20-pound kid. And the kid was fully mature. And that's the other factor to consider too, because I have small breed dogs. They're fully mature at about a year of age. If you have a large breed dog, and the larger the breed, the longer it takes for maturity and development, you're at 2 years or 3 years of age, depending on that breed. And I think research is what we're talking about here, is that you need to not take this lightly and to research all of it, what your choices are going to be. If you have choices, you may not be in a position to choose, but if you have choices, do your research and decide what is best for you and your kid, and know what you're looking at down the line based on the choice that you make.
Yeah, I'm glad you stated it so eloquently, because it is about research, not just research for your pet, but also your lifestyle, as you pointed out. You know, if you can mitigate those risks, with that kind of oversight, that's a game changer. as opposed for most folks out there. So I we're much more aligned in this than I'll admit even I thought we might be. um, because it's important, but I think there are so many factors in the health of our beings. This is just another one that you've got to do your research and dive deeper on. And I think this is one that we have less control over than we ever have in the pet world.
Yes,
And so where I come into it is I'm in alignment, but it is not for me. It would never deter me if I came across a pet who had been spay or neutered early, just simply from the fact of that's not a choice a lot of pet parents are getting to make these days, because if you are adopting, as you pointed out, it's like, hey, these rescues, they're having to do the best of a bad situation, and so they're going to that um, hey, we're going to preemptively or proactively address the things that we can impact in the cycle of, synergistic, overall the pet world. And there's just too many. There's not enough resources. There's not enough fosters, as you pointed out, and all the rest of that. So when you go to shelters, that can be a requirement. So I would just say,
it
uh,
is.
hey, and even in the municipalities, I'll go back to I had to make the decision. Um, we could not take Belle because I was waiting as long as I possibly could. We could not take her to a daycare that I would have loved to have taken her to when I was going to be going on a trip with the family. So we had to make other arrangements because that was not going to be the reason I was going to have her get spay or neutered. But it was a factor in those discussions of when's the right time, what can we accommodate to keep her safe. And she is a bigger dog, so she's outside in the yard quite
Hmm.
often. We live where plenty of different animals, as I've mentioned, she's a mix. So I am aware of those things, and it did move up. I'll be honest with everybody in that it moved up the time frame of when we decided to do it. Not dramatically, but it did move it forward a bit, where I was like, well, I'd really like to hit this mark before we do it. We probably missed that mark, by a few months,
Hmm.
because of that awareness, that research. These are the things we're trying to avoid, but here's the reality of our situation. So I would just say, um, when you do the research, to your point, I also think you see those things. And I don't think anybody is, it's not, there's no pamphlet, they don't give you that pamphlet
No,
to
no, but I
say,
don't
like,
think
hey,
I
here's
don't.
the ramifications.
Oh, yeah, they don't, and I don't think that people really understand that there are ramifications. I don't think they really understand that. They pick their 6-month-old dog up from the vet, and the puppy is been spayed or neutered, and the kid recovers well because it's young, and a week later they're doing everything they can to keep the kid still quiet for another week, and that's not happening.
Yep.
And I get all of that, but you need to know the negative effects of a pediatric spay or neuter to make that choice. Now,
Right.
in your situation, having a dog outside that's in heat
Right.
is like ringing the dinner bell,
Yep.
because dogs for quite some distance can tell that there's a dog about, that is in heat. Um, and so it's a greater risk. But you bring up a great point that changes what you do, maybe for going on vacation, because you now need a pet sitter, and the pet
Right.
sitter needs to understand the situation, because you can't have that kid in a boarding situation.
Well, and you can't have the pet sitter take the, oh, we'll go to the dog park.
Right,
Oh, I
right.
I take the pack out of, 9 dogs
Right,
for a hike, they're gonna love. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. The reason I'm using you, I
right,
don't want Bella around anybody that, we can have an accident here. I love Bella, but I don't need 6 or 7 of her at this point. So you're right. It does change, not her. It changes me as the pet
right.
parent. And I think, I don't share that to say, well, look how good we did. It was just part of that factor. And I think a lot of the things that you and I talk about from a practicality standpoint, that's why it made so much sense to call it practical pet chat was, okay, I can't expect her to no means no at the dog park, right? She's got to, be able to be a dog and run around.
And
I
it's
have to change
instinct.
myself. Yeah, it is instinct, and I've got to change. And I think about, we had the little neighbor dog who could squeeze through even our little extra fencing and was so determined to get to her that even the little, bunny fence that we had put up through our, and we lived, that's another thing to think about, requirement for wrought iron fences. So we can't have a blocked out everything. And so, we do our best. And that little dog could jump that perfectly, make it through. That's how determined. And we would sit, and be like, how is that dog in the backyard again with Belle? And I remember the kids going, "Well, it's no big deal. It's just so cute and all that." And I'm like, if that was a boy dog, we'd be
Yeah.
having a different discussion right now. It's a good thing that's a girl dog. So long story short is you're right. It changes everything that you're planning. You got to have a plan, and we've had discussions about adoption and all the rest of that. This is part of that planning and something you should have a discussion about, because the other part of it too, to your point, not every family member also understands. Why are you? I remember having arguments with family members, not my immediate family, they got it, but brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews, and somehow related in some weird way of, oh my God, you got to get that dog, spayed right away. Get it spayed and neutered every animal you get. There's just so much misinformation out there. And it's funny because you go to one site and it'll say, oh, look, it's going to have this impact on their behavior. It's going to have this impact on this. You go to the next one, it's like, no, it has no impact, no bearing. So there's so much misinformation out there. It's hard to know who to trust in these
That's
situations.
the problem for consumers and pet parents. They're like, "Ugh, the earth is round, the earth is flat." I mean, for every point that anybody wants to make, you can find something to support that, on the internet. It doesn't matter how extreme or normal it is. It just it's a bizarre situation to try to navigate. But I can remember a client coming to the store in tears because she had gone on vacation and her pet sitter picked up her dog, and the pet sitter stopped by her own house for a minute, brought the dog in, didn't think about the fact that her male dog was there, and they tied together. And so
No.
now her dog, which she did not want to breed at all, was with puppies. And she was like, "What do I do?" I was like, "Oh my gosh." I mean, she was just so upset.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that I mean, it's like any parents of any level. It doesn't matter if you have two-legged skin kids or you have four-legged fur kids. You have to be the person that understands every aspect of it. And I know I've had conversations with clients in the past, and they're like, "Ah, you're just so extreme about everything." I'm like, "I'm not. I think about everything because I'm required to. First of all, because of what I do for a living, you count on me to think about those things. And more importantly, I have to think about those things with regard to my animals. So I need to be sure. I mean, a perfect example, I have small dogs. My back door and my front door have a very expensive, because I have such little dogs, I had to get something with fine mesh, very expensive gating that we have to step over to go out the back door or to go out the front door, in or out. Because otherwise, I don't want to be in a situation that somebody makes a mistake, somebody forgets, somebody doesn't see it happen, and a kid, a tiny little kid, because my kids are 3 pounds, scoots out the door. I peregrine falcons, which I love, nesting a mate, a pair of peregrine falcons nesting outside of my front door. It would be all over. I can't
Right.
fault the peregrine falcons for that. I don't have any idea why that happened,
That's right.
but
That was the Peregrine Falcons were apparently celebrating being at the
woo,
front door. That's why. Um,
that was crazy. I have no idea why that happened.
that,
Be
that's
prepared.
why.
Anything can
Yeah.
happen here.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, my husband was even like, I'll make sure they won't get out. I said, nope. I mean, it was a hard and fast. This is never moving. And if we need to move it because we had appliances delivered or something like that,
Sure.
both of the dogs are locked up in the bedroom. And we make sure there's no oops. There can never be an oops. There can never be a,
Right.
oh crap, what happened? Or can't find or whatever, whatever, whatever. So you have to think through all those things. And if we were to have a pet sitter, which we wouldn't, but if we did have a pet sitter, it would be you need to understand this is how this needs to happen. I had the one time that I ever left my kids, I had 12 of them that I ever left my kids with somebody. It was a very wonderful client's teenage daughter. And she actually stayed at the store well, we went and did something. I don't even remember what it was. It was after hours, and the 12 kids could run around the store, but she was told, "Do not unlock the door for any reason for anyone." And you need to. She could. She. We came back. Her eyes were huge. She's like, "I don't know how you do this." She goes,
Right.
"I was counting constantly." And I could never get to 12 because they were moving constantly, and I didn't know, did I already count that one? And one was 2.5 pounds full grown, another one was 16 pounds full grown. They're everywhere all at once. And she said, it was overwhelming. I said, yeah,
Yeah.
I could do it because we did it all the time. So it was our family. But I knew what that was going to be like for someone else. We never did it again, more because we felt sorry for whoever we were going to put that off on. But even with one or two, frankly, shit happens.
Yeah.
It's your job to make sure that you have an answer, a workaround, a plan B, a fix to ensure that shit doesn't happen.
Right. Right.
Or at least you've narrowed it down as to the options of what could happen to, something, oh crap, the one thing I didn't think of.
Yeah. Well, and just kind of coming back to this, I think when it comes to spay and neutering, do the research, and that includes being self-reflective. What's your situation? The what ifs are what ifs because they can happen. We're not talking about aliens, showing up in spaceships and abducting you and, doing, we're talking about real things here. Okay. So there are ramifications to the health of your pet. But if you don't and can't, we see the ramifications all the time. And so do all the rescues and all the rest. So work through it. I think that's the practical part of you got to work through this. But this is a big decision. And unfortunately, in many cases, it might have already been taken out of your decision making process because of how you obtained your beautiful, loving being. Don't freak out. Okay. There are other things that you can, do to improve the health and address and ease the concerns. The one thing that just gets me is those extremes. And I've heard this, and this is the thing that kills me. So when this topic came up for you and I was like, I got to make sure I say this. So I'm going to say it right now. Um, the extremes that folks go to with whether it's the food, whether it's anything, but in particular this, I would never adopt because they spay and neuter so early. Um, you didn't deserve that beautiful being then, if that's what your criteria is, and that's fine. That's your decision. Um, but I'm certainly not of that. I have adopted, and that's already been done by the rescue organization. I still had an amazing experience. That pet was an amazing, family member for many years. And I think one of the things you and I have talked about, we're not guaranteed anything more than this moment. So don't overanalyze this either. Okay.
Right.
Don't let that be
No,
the
but
idea.
but to your earlier statement of there are ways to, mitigate and fix and correct and all that. You cannot fix growth plates that don't close.
100%.
So if
100%.
you have within your power to be a responsible owner, and part of the reason I bring this up is because in my particular area, there is a plethora of doodles, which are coming from breeders and things like that. And I'm like, it's an explosion of doodles. And it has been like that for the last couple of years, and they're fabulous. But at some point we need to talk about what you think you're going to get versus what you get when you mix breeds together. Um, but those people have the ability to decide because they've taken in a puppy. And that's really where I'm coming from. If you're taking in a puppy, that it's your decision to make,
Yeah.
please think through it and look at every aspect of it, make the decision that works for you. Just be aware everything has ramifications, right? Everything has a good and a bad side to it. Everything is, a positive and
Yep.
negative.
Yep.
So just make sure that negative. What I don't want is the clients that I've had that said, I had no idea. I wouldn't have done it.
Correct. Correct.
And it's like, oh, I wish you did. I wish
Yeah.
you had known. So now it's okay, do the research. Look at the ramifications of pediatric spay and neuter. If you are in control and it works for you and you can take the responsibility of overseeing your animal at all times, then wait accordingly, and if not, love your animal. Bottom
Yep.
line is it seems to be the theme for every one of our episodes.
That that is so true. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Is that the new movie from The Rock and Chris Pratt, The Explosion of Doodles? I think I saw that preview coming up. If
Honest
not,
to
I'm
God,
sure.
we have walking trails around my house, like miles and miles and miles of trails. And every day I see at least a half a dozen. And they're not the same ones because they're different colors and different sizes. And I'm like, wow, and they're great dogs. Not saying anything bad about, there's a lot of them and I know they're coming from breeders. So I just would hope that people are, doing what they can to look out for the growth and development of those kids.
Well, and I'll just finish up with for all of you with doodles, please send those emails to
And send
practicalpetchat
pictures.
at
Send pictures.
gmail.com. Send the pictures. I'm pretty sure at some point Lauren will be speaking at the monthly Doodles Club. Um, but you can check out all the things we're doing on the web, on the social media channels. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know some topics are tough, and we're only scratching the surface on some of these. There's so much more to talk about, but we don't want to overwhelm everybody with the 7 hour discussion of here's all the different things. Here's all. So, again, thank you for taking the time you have with us today. We really appreciate you joining us here at Practical Pet Chat.
Thanks, guys.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved.
Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.